All right, it's go time. Hi, everyone. Welcome to DIME's October webinar. Every month I have to read the date on the slide. You think I would get used to it. Welcome to this webinar. This is a really fantastic one because this is the first time actually our new research committee is presenting some of the work that they've done. It's been very breakneck speeds here at our research committee, kicked off earlier this year with a whole change of the guard, led by Isaac, who's moderating today, also alongside Ben. So what we're seeing today is some of the research that came out from our most recent group. And I will say it's been very quick. We kicked off the new research committee earlier this year, and here they are presenting some of their findings in October of the same year. So DIME is only as great as our members are. And so the folks on our research committee help make us fantastic. So thank you for presenting to everyone today. But let me go ahead and also share my screen here so that we can get started. So here we are. All right. So here is who we're hearing from today. And of course, with some quick housekeeping here. Quick housekeeping here is that this session is being recorded, and so slides and the recording will be made available to everyone after the live session. But also, please feel welcome to ask questions. The magic of DIME's live events happen from interaction with you on the line today. So please don't be shy. Raise your hand if you have a question, and we, in the reactions setting at the bottom of Zoom there, and we can unmute you to ask your question live, or feel free to type your questions in the Q&A panel or in the chat box, and we'll get to as many as we can today. But let's go ahead and move on to what y'all came here for today. We are moderated today by the formidable Isaac Rodriguez Chavez, and I'll leave it to you to take it away, Isaac.
And thank you, Rachel. Welcome everybody who is attending, dear colleagues, attending this webinar. I am truly delighted to be here with all of you. And you see in this slide, I am the Senior Vice President for Scientific and Clinical Affairs at ICON PLC. I am the Research Committee Co-Chair for DIME, working together with the wonderful people that you will be hearing of today, and many other research committee members. I am also the board member for the Scientific Leadership Board of the DIME Society. And it's a true honor and privilege to be here with all of you and to work side by side with this distinguished group of colleagues who really are making a difference in the field of digital medicine. I will introduce them, and we will get to hear their presentations. We will have at the end a Q&A session, and I look forward to getting questions. We look forward to getting questions from all of you in our attendees to make this a very interactive experience. In the first of the presentations or introductions, I will have to introduce Dr. Jordan Silverman. He is a Director of Clinical Analytics and Research and Digital Care Delivery at Anthem Incorporated. Jordan is co-founder of the Anthem Digital Health Evidence Committee, and within Anthem, he performs detailed evidence assessments to identify digital health products that are most likely to serve the needs of Anthem's 43 million members, an impressive number. Jordan is a pleasure to work with, and he is a leader in our research committee. He has an outstanding project that he will allude to during his presentation. Next, we have also, as part of this panel, Dr. Jasmine Damestani. I hope I said that correct, Jasmine. She is a wonderful colleague and friend as well. Jasmine is an associate director and head of digital medicine at Karyopharm Therapeutics. Within the PhD, she has a PhD in bioengineering. And Jasmine joined Karyopharm Pharmaceuticals in October of 2020 after working at Amgen and Biogen. In her current role, Jasmine identifies and implements new ways to leverage data and technology in global clinical studies to accelerate the measurement of progression or recovery in oncology disease areas while reducing patient burden. That is quite important. And last but not least, my favorite engineers of all, I have my colleague and friend, Elizabeth Kunkowski, who is an engineer by training, and a Master of Science in Engineer. And I don't remember the other piece, I think it's Health Sciences, but she will correct me legally. She is a policy analyst at the FDA and the CDER Office of Medical Policy. Beth works on policies to modernize clinical trials, such as the use of digital health technologies to remote acquisition and decentralized clinical trials. She is a leader in the field. She is an expert, and she is our go-to person from the regulatory standpoint at DIME and in many other venues. With that, I will leave these three wonderful stars, colleagues, and their presentations, and get back to you during the Q&A session. Next is Jordan, please. Can we go to the next slides, Rachel? Oh, so no, next is me. Talked about being spontaneous. So we have here what we have in the research committee, and I get to talk a little bit about this, is essentially to share our vision and our mission. And here we have an outline of the wonderful people who are part of the research committee, the new research committee that was implemented this year and that runs until 2023. So we really are a scientific research committee engaged in multiple projects that lead to the production of quality and excellence in peer-reviewed journals. We generate scientific evidence, conduct investigations on the specific topics that are really relevant for digital medicine. We're an engaged group of collaborators, and we facilitate collaborations with multiple other organizations, and we promote the dissemination of information that in the projects that we are producing. So far, we have about 10 projects that are happening right now in the Digital Medicine Society Research Committee, and they are all outstanding projects helping and will make a difference in the field of digital medicine. Today, you will hear three of the panelists and three of the research committee members who are engaged in all of these investigations. Ben, my co-chair and colleague, is not here today due to other engagements, but he shares responsibilities with me. And next, please. With that, I will pass it on to Jordan. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Isaac. I'll speak today about why evidence quality is critical for digital health interventions. But first, I want to thank the Digital Medicine Society, the research committee, as well as my co-presenters, Isaac, Yasmin, and Rachel. It's truly a privilege to have this opportunity and to work with such outstanding colleagues. So why is evidence quality critical for digital health interventions? Well, there are a couple reasons. Next slide, please. We're in Wild West phase digital health, in my opinion. And over-promising is something we see from digital health vendors. And our best tool to predict which digital health products might actually help a patient really is evidence. But there's a lot of devil in the details, and the quality of that evidence is critical to help us predict which digital health interventions are actually going to move the needle on valued outcomes. Next slide, please. Okay. To set some context here, you might ask, well, don't most of them work anyway? And if we knew that, say, 90% of digital health products provided clinically benefits, would not be as important. You could throw a dart, and more likely than not, you would find a digital health product or a digital health intervention that's going to provide some benefit. And so it's an important question to ask, well, what proportion of digital health interventions that are out there actually have a good shot at providing clinically meaningful benefit? And that's a hard thing to get at. There are thousands and thousands of digital health products out there. One of the ways that we can begin to address that question is by looking at market research data. And the plot here shows some of the best data that are available currently. Retention rates shown on the y-axis here, time in days shown on the x-axis. As you can see, in the market research data for these popular digital health products, engagement drops off very quickly. These data happen to pertain to popular apps in the mental health space, but certainly we see similar patterns across a variety of therapeutic areas. And what was observed in these particular data is a median engagement rate of 3.9% at 15 days, which does not bode well for the clinical of these products. And there are quite a few different examples of this. And when you take these kinds of data in conjunction with what is often observed when digital health products are deployed, I think it's fair to say that it's really a small proportion, most likely, a small proportion of the digital health products out there that are likely to provide benefit. So with that context, let's move forward here. With that context, it becomes important to look closely at each digital health intervention that we may deploy to identify what really can move the needle on clinical outcomes. So we've said that digital health is the Wild West. We've said that it is likely that a majority of the digital health interventions out there don't have a good shot at providing meaningful benefit. And so it's important to look closely and find those that are likely to help patients. And next slide, please. And low quality evidence often causes overconfidence in digital health interventions. So I'll share a couple of details, a couple of examples of how that can happen. And I'll address some of the considerations that may be important for digital health vendors to be thinking about when generating evidence that can hopefully help accelerate that transition from the piloting phase to the scaled adoption phase. So let's move forward to the next slide, please. Okay. This will be just a few examples. We're just scratching the surface here. Next slide. Okay. For any treatment, digital health or not, there's going to be a range of observed effectiveness levels, a range of effect sizes. Often that distribution will be Gaussian, will be normal, and you'll have A few data points shown here in red that look really good, and quite a few others that maybe look less favorable. These are all simulated data for illustrative purposes. And given some of the forces at play currently in the digital health community, given the marketing-driven nature of a lot of the messaging, given the competitive landscape, funding considerations, and current regulatory context, it's certainly plausible that in many cases when a payer or a similar stakeholder organization is presented with clinical outcomes, really what they are seeing would be like the outcomes shown here in red, just the most favorable sliver of that distribution. And when we see that, at least from a payer perspective, we always have to assume we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg, really, and that there are a lot more data points that we are not seeing. Couple great solutions include register using clinicaltrials.gov or a similar tool, and using prospective designs. With that, let's go to the second example, please. Regression to the mean is super common yet underappreciated. These data are based on a real evidence assessment and with a few details obscured for some privacy, but often what we will see is a observational study that shows year-over-year improvement without a lot of consideration for what might have happened if the digital health program had not been implemented. And in this particular example, there was a finding that was being touted of roughly 60% reduction in the incidence of emergency visits. And then we looked in our own claims data and we were able to see that if you just do nothing, actually we would expect about a 70 to 85% reduction from regression to the mean alone. So things like this are really important, and there are lots of solutions. Of course, a control arm, ideally randomized, can basically solve this problem. There's some devil in the details there, but there's a lot you can do from a design perspective to address this common issue. Next slide, please. Another issue that, gosh, we see all the time, particularly in digital health, is attrition bias. Such an important issue. Again, these are, like example one, these data are simulated for illustrative purposes. Real data are never so neat and tidy. This is just to explain the basic pattern that is observed so commonly. And we're using the example of systolic blood pressure here. We've got a low, medium, and high engagement. And the low engagement group starts off with less favorable outcomes, in this case, higher blood pressure. The high engagement group starts with more favorable outcomes. And then the medium engagement group is in the middle. And as you can see from the plot, the high engagement group is retained longer in the trial. And so what happens so often is that data are modeled assuming that that a lot of data are missing completely at random, even though there's really no justification for that assumption. And you couldn't get away with something like this as much if it were a drug study and the FDA were looking closely, but high attrition rates often question in the Wild West these days. And what can happen is you have more motivated patients who, all else being equal, tend to show favorable outcomes and also tend to be retained longer in trials. And then you fit a model to those data and it can look like the data are improving over time. And that actually creates an illusion of effectiveness. And often what is in fact happening is just that more motivated patients, all else being equal, have favorable outcomes and tend to be retained longer in trials. And there are lots of things you can do to mitigate this issue, including aggressive data chasing, appropriate statistical diagnostics. You can use imputation, but it has to be done carefully, sensitivity analyses. A lot of devil in the details here, but these are just a few of many examples of the kinds of data quality considerations that we have to look at really carefully to identify what digital health interventions truly have a good shot at helping a patient. Next slide, please. I would emphasize strongly that we're just scratching the surface here, but if you are a digital health vendor and you want to be able to move your product from piloting to that scaled adoption phase, I would emphasize that these details really can matter. And these are not just, academic considerations. These issues really impact how well we are able to connect patients with truly effective digital health tools. These details can really impact whether or not you or a family member gets a digital health program that's going to prevent a stroke or a heart attack or help you manage depression or substance use disorder or whatever it is. These details really matter. Next slide, please. Okay. A target future state would have digital health evidence standards being clear and consistent, evidence quality being generated, the evidence quality being actionable consistently. In a target future state, we would establish trust with digital health vendors and reduce the resistance to scaling digital health solutions. And we would have a very clear path to scale for digital health vendors. Next slide, please. Okay. There are many things we need to do to achieve that target state. Here are a few. One critical step is to align within the digital health community on standards defining actionable quality evidence. And that's one thing that our work group, one of the work groups within the DIME Research Committee is working on. Next slide, please. One of our research committee work groups is developing what we're calling the EvidenceDefined Framework, which is a rigorous and rapid approach to assessing clinical value for digital health interventions. And it achieves, I think, higher levels of rigor than existing frameworks through three key elements. It incorporates evidence quality criteria that are unique to digital health. Also, criteria that require enhanced vigilance in the Wild West context of digital health, excuse me, and finally achieves rigor by leveraging established frameworks that were developed for non-digital interventions, that were developed to assess evidence, for example, pertaining to drugs, but many of those existing frameworks are highly relevant for the work that we do in digital health. And it also, this new framework we are developing in the research committee also has a number of elements to increase efficiency. And we think that this new framework, that this evidence-defined framework, may help accelerate progress toward consistently actionable evidence in digital health. Next slide, please. So we've got that first step, which is to align on definitions of actionable quality evidence and to present several additional steps. I will turn it over to my colleague, Yasmin.
Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, Jordan. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to share a few more possible steps to get to our future target estates. As Jordan mentioned, these are by no means the only steps. One potential key step is generating clear standards for measuring in digital health. In addition to that, we also need statistical standards for biometric technology, as well as innovative trial designs to accommodate the dynamic nature of digital health interventions. Over the next couple of slides, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about each of these key steps. Next. For those of you working on evaluating connected sensor technologies, DIME evidence checklist, which was recently published, is a really great starting point. And this ensures quality reporting in studies evaluating the performance of digital measurement products. If you missed the webinar for that, it's available on the DIME website. I highly recommend it. You can also find the 25-item checklist that really covers the universal requirements for best research practices, plus additional considerations for reporting on connected sensor technologies and software. Next, please. To move towards our future estate, in my DIME research committee working group, I collaborate with 8 other individuals who in their day job work at digital health technology, pharma, academia, and FDA. And we focus on statistical considerations for analyzing and interpreting data that is generated from biometric monitoring technologies, or biomeds, in clinical trials. As defined in one of earlier DIME publications, biomeds are connected digital medicine products that process data captured by mobile sensors and use algorithms to generate measures of behavioral or physiological function that may lead to identification and deployment of digital biomarkers. As you might have noticed, DIME crowdsourced library of digital endpoints is constantly growing. And along with that, there's a growing need for a standardized methodology to validate health-related digital measures. Our paper provides considerations for a statistical analysis planning to analyze and interpret this large amount of digital health data that is generated from the biomeds and clinical data trial. And our goal is to support clinical validation of ECOAs and digital biomarkers. We are very close to finalizing and submitting this paper, so more to come on that soon. Next, please. In addition to the work we do at DIME, there are several new publications that have also explored the possibility of using innovative methods to accommodate dynamic digital health interventions and increase the likelihood of success in a randomized clinical trial. This figure is from a recent publication from Gao and collaborators, and they have mapped existing approaches along the two dimensions of a strength of evidence and a study duration. And it ranges from expert opinions and case examples to prospective randomized clinical trial and then observational studies. This paper really highlights the gap for faster and higher quality evidence generation and suggests that simulation-based research could potentially bridge this gap. Other creative approaches may include N-of-1 trial, micro-randomized clinical studies, multi-phase optimization strategy, innovative adaptive trial methods, and novel methods that are designed for digital health interventions. Next, please. Beyond evidence generation, there are several other domains that are important. It is essential for digital health vendors to have a quantifiable business value upfront with measurable success criteria for the claims they're making. And these claims can include anything from improved patient health outcome to reduce healthcare spend, to increase access to care, or improving the experience of patients and their care team. Another important domain is alignment between healthcare startups and healthcare ecosystem. And this includes timeline expectations and the right capacity and agility for long-term execution. Last but not least, it is crucial to have a viable business model that can allow for financial ability and flexibility for all the stakeholders to scale up or down as needed, as participants in clinical trials can choose to participate in the trial and choose not to provide explicit consent for using digital health tool and data sharing. With that, I will hand it over to Beth to tell us more about the regulatory space of digital health technologies.
Thank you, Yasmin. As Yasmin was just talking about, there are a lot of things to consider besides just the basic evidence perspective. And one of those is the regulatory perspective, although a large basis of what the regulators look at is the evidence. But first, I'll just talk about some of the more frequently asked questions in the regulatory realm to help level the stage. And the first is just that we all believe there are many benefits to digital health technologies and the ability to enhance remote data collection and just provide more general access to patients. Next slide. So one basic question that we hear very frequently is my DHT a medical device? And the key here is item 2. What is the intended use of the device in the cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease? Many DHTs are actually regulated medical devices, but many are not. They fall in what we consider a general wellness device, which is not directly regulated by the FDA. Next slide. So if my DHT is a medical device, is marketing authorization required to use a DHT in a clinical investigation? And the direct answer is, in general, they are exempt from many requirements applicable to devices, as long as the investigation, which could be a drug clinical trial that is subject to 312, as long as all of the components of 812 are covered in your investigational study, you don't need to have prior clearance or approval of your device to use it in a clinical investigation. And the Center for Devices now has a Digital Health Center of Excellence, which is a great resource for many of these types of questions. Next slide. So now for the regulatory perspective on evidence, you may be familiar with the regulation for adequate and well-controlled studies to support a new drug application. The key point here is the method of assessment of the subject's response are well-defined and reliable. And what this means in terms of using a DHT is the DHT, well-defined and reliable, if that's your method of data collection for your clinical investigation. Next slide. If a DHT has marketing authorization, does that mean I can use it in my clinical trial? And that depends on many aspects, one of which is the DHT fit for purpose. And these terms are defined in the FDA NIH Best Glossary. And we've used the definition fit for purpose as a conclusion that the level of validation associated with a DHT is sufficient to support its proposed use. And then the clinical investigation endpoint should reflect an outcome of interest. And the endpoint is the precisely defined variable intended to reflect an outcome of interest that is statistically analyzed to address a particular research question. And we spent a lot of time in the past few years to focus on, we really believe the endpoint should be clinically meaningful to the patient. And that really is one of our driving forces right now, and particularly why we think DHTs have a lot of value. Next slide. One important thing to keep in mind is that when you are collecting data with a DHT to inform an endpoint, you begin as you would with any other clinical trial, and you start with developing that endpoint, and you define it, and then you have to justify it, and then you're defining if it's safety or effectiveness, and then deciding if it's a primary, secondary, exploratory. And after you've done all of that, then you start looking at your DHT, and do I have the right DHT? And then have I verified and validated that DHT? Next slide, and I'll talk a little more about verification and validation. So verification and validation are terms that we all hear every day, and there are a lot of different definitions out there. In fact, the Digital Medicine Society has one of the most utilized frameworks with the V3 framework, which is verification, analytical validation, and clinical validation. It's great, it's published, and we can all use it as a frame of reference with consistent terminology. The FDA has taken a slightly different approach in that, honestly, it doesn't matter what you call it at the end of the day. We just want to make sure we have confidence in the data that your DHT is collecting. And so we have steered a little more towards just verification and validation, and not directly breaking up validation. We want validation to be the confirmation by examination of provision of objective evidence that the selected DHT appropriately assesses the clinical event or characteristic in the proposed participant population. This is really where you're looking at the patient population you're going to study in your clinical trial. I wanted to highlight that usability testing is not directly highlighted in either of these definitions, but as with the V3 framework, it can go somewhere in the validation process, but it is an important part of ensuring your DHT is fit for purpose. And then another point of today's webinar is that all of your different stakeholders need to come together to complete the verification and validation process. The vendor needs input from the sponsor needs input from patients and regulators to make sure that validation is completed for the appropriate patient population. You need to talk to patients to assess that, come up with a plan, and then come talk to the FDA. Next slide. So early engagement with the FDA really is an important step that will lead you to success with your clinical trial. There are many different forms to submit a meeting request to the relevant review division. And it really is crucial that the review division is included early on in your discussion, because they're the ones that review your application. You have to select your endpoint and DHT in advance and have some basic evidence to support both of those. The endpoint needs to be clinically meaningful, and we want to know what you've done to complete verification and validation of the DHT. It's perfectly appropriate to ask, are we doing the right verification and validation studies? Is there something we're missing? We'd rather ask that up front before you start your clinical trial, so that we're all on the right path. We might not say that the DHT collected data is appropriate for the primary endpoint, but it might be a good exploratory endpoint in an early phase study that could then be expanded farther down the line. There are some other FDA resources, the Drug Development and Medical Device Development Tool Programs, as well as the CDRH Digital Center for Excellence. And then there are many outside resources, including DIME. The research committee has been doing a lot of research as exhibited today to help drive the development and adoption of DHTs in clinical research. And we're excited to see where things go in the future. And now I believe Jordan is going to wrap all of this up for us.
Thanks so much, Beth. Very important considerations if you're a digital health vendor exploring a FDA approval or clearance of any kind. So these are the top 5 steps that digital health vendors may want to consider to accelerate the transition from pilots to scaled adoption. First, would encourage collecting clinical data early, even before you get into formal studies. Really look closely at your data, be honest with yourself, and decide whether it makes sense to proceed to formal studies, or are you looking at data that you would be comfortable sharing externally. Second, have internal experts within your organization develop your evidence strategy. Don't always assume that higher quality evidence costs more. There are lots of opportunities to increase evidence quality without increasing costs. Sometimes you got to be creative. Third, talk to external experts like Beth, and make sure you're getting that regulatory input in addition to speaking with experts in reimbursement. For register trials, using something like clinicaltrials.gov, state publicly what you'll do and then do it. And finally, as we've discussed, some of these evidence quality details really matter. So pay attention to those details. If you're a digital health vendor, be careful to generate the highest quality evidence that is feasible for your organization. And with that, I will turn it back to Isaac for a few closing remarks.
Thank you, Jordan, Beth, and Jasmine. Really exciting presentations in a very, very prominent topic that really embraces all of us, and that really is paramount for the digital medicine field. No closing remarks, because now is when hopefully the best is about to happen, is about the Q&A session for everyone. And I look forward to having questions from the audience. So this is your time to type questions in the Q&A chat, and so that we can get to your questions. We are dealing with an evolving field, and we know, we all understand that. So there are multiple things that were discussed in the presentations given. The generation of evidence to ensure quality of the digital tools, digital health technologies that are going to be utilized. The need not only for evidence, but clinical evidence, as you discussed, Jordan, the importance of that from the statistical and so on viewpoint, according to Jasmine, and the importance of the regulatory framework to do this in compliance with the law and the regulations, according to Beth. So we have a few questions here. And so one of the first questions, actually, I'm going to start with Beth, is connected to the evidence that is really necessary, the data that is really necessary to use these tools in clinical investigations. We're talking about validation, clinical data. What about early on? How do we connect the dots early on when there is a manufacturing process in the lab, we're testing the specific devices, what kind of processes need to be implemented to make sure that that specific digital health technology is truly, as you said, going to be utilized according to the specific intended use later on. What processes might be in place for those?
I'm sorry, you're talking about the manufacturing of the digital health technology?
Yes, early on, we were talking about the validation process that happens later on, the clinical validation. So what is before the clinical validation?
Oh, the verification process in the lab. I didn't spend as much time talking about that process, but that's where you're making sure your sensors work and that the data that you are actually collecting, I like to call it the black box. It's a little black box and data goes in and data comes out, and you have confidence that the data that you're getting is what it's supposed to be.
Thank you. I don't mean to quiz you. You and I understand each other for working together for so many years. I just wanted to make sure that the audience understands that there is a full set of processes that are implemented and that should be implemented, and they go from early on. Validation from the clinical standpoint of any digital health technology at the very last or late stage alone and by itself will not be sufficient to really optimize the efficiency and to bring to the best of that technology for the specific intended purpose or fit for purpose intended use, as you have been discussing. I wanted to put that in the early on conversation because that is really critical for the discussions that we are going to happen. So yes, thank you. Verification is critical. Validation is critical. The two are regulatory requirements. And as you said, Beth, a discussion needs to happen early on with the regulatory agencies to understand that process and what is the best to proceed with each specific digital health technology. Thank you. So I'm going to Jordan. And Jordan, can you please enlighten us with information? If the evidence quality is important to payers, why do some digital health products with randomized controlled trials evidence not receive favorable coverage decisions?
Great question. Not all RCTs are created equal. And so often what we see looking at discussions about evidence standards is the specification of designs, specific trial designs as proposals as being sufficient to warrant a given adoption level. So folks will say, oh, if it's an RCT, automatically it should be adopted at a certain level. But just being an RCT is usually not enough. It has to actually be a solid RCT with actionable evidence quality. And that gets back to some of the evidence quality considerations that I mentioned and many, many others. So, yeah.
And there is another, thank you, Jordan. And there is another question from the audience for you. And this talks about thanking you for the excellent summary of the concern about the Wild West of digital health. So as we're calling it, and the question is, would you be able to share a reference of a digital health trial in that you feel was done well?
It's a great question. And I can't for professional reasons. Anthem would not be comfortable with me endorsing any particular vendor in this context or any particular vendor's trial. But what I can say is that
not the vendor, but probably information around a therapeutic area, a good tool that was implemented in a trial, something that is more general applications, general experience, rather than a specific vendor.
What I would say is that a a great starting point is to look at robust evidence assessment frameworks that were developed for drugs, and those frameworks and other modalities. So something like the GRADE framework is a great place to start. And if you apply something like that to your digital health product and to your evidence generation strategy, and you come up with a favorable evaluation using the GRADE framework, then it's very likely that you will be in good shape. There will probably be a few adaptations needed for digital health, but something like GRADE will get you 80 or 90% of the way.
Okay, thank you. And so we have a question for Jasmine. How can digital health startup and healthcare partners align on viable business models as they move from pilot to scale? Jasmine.
That's a great question. One thing that can be considered is a phased implementation in partnership between the healthcare startups and healthcare ecosystem, including pharma companies. And in this phased implementation, specific milestones and metrics can be set for a scaling up, and this can help aligning the expectations and ensuring that as they move to the next stage, those parties are satisfied before extending their relationship and moving to a scale-up approach.
Thank you, Jasmine. And I have another question here that is for Beth, and that is, can you comment on how industry should engage with FDA on measures? Is it a question we always get from our partners?
Sure, of course. The most direct way is always through the review division. So it depends what phase study you have and where you are in your development, but a type B meeting or a pre-phase 2 meeting is really going to be the best way. And then in your cover letter, you can always indicate that you'd like to have the Office of Medical Policy, Beth Konkuski, attend that meeting, and I can make sure to connect the dots and be involved in that discussion from the beginning. If you are in the device world and if you are just a DHT vendor, you can also go straight to the Center for Devices, either a pre-submission to the relevant review division, or also just their Digital Health Center for Excellence is, you can just email them directly and they will work with you to assess whether or not your digital health technology would be considered a regulated device. If you're not really something that fits in any of those boxes, we also have the Critical Path Innovation Pathway, which is a meeting that's it's a separate office that runs those meetings, but they do a really good job of trying to reach out to all of the relevant FDA members to make sure that we participate. My office generally participates the review divisions and also the Digital Health Center for Excellence. Great,
thank you. There is another question from the audience, and this is connected to, could you please clarify, does the 3.9% median, and this is for Jordan, engagement rate means that 4 out of 100 people engage in mental health apps at day 15?
What it means is that if you take the most popular mental health apps and you look at their 15-day retention rate, you look at the percent of users who are still using the app after 15 days. On average, it's about half of them will have a rate less than about 4%. It's about half of them, for about half of them at day 15 will have that 15-day engagement rate below 4%.
Okay, thank you very much. And so next, I'm running out of time, so I will try to be quick. You have provided a wide range of recommendations on how death by pilot can be avoided or at least reduced. If you've be forced to pick one recommendation that is important to your personal work, which one would be and why? And that is open to all of you.
I already typed my answer in the chat, so I'll let Jordan and Beth go.
Can you speak up? We're not hearing you well. What did you say?
Sure, I already typed my answer in the chat, but I can say it too. So for me, working in a pharma company that focuses on oncology, the pain point is limited evidence for digital health tools that are proven to help patient outcome in the oncology space.
Thank you. Thank you, Jasmine. Any other comment?
I would reiterate what I said earlier of come talk to the FDA early as you're developing your plan.
I would certainly agree and add, be honest with yourself regarding what you're seeing in your data. If data are not favorable, do something to change the product, and then be very honest with other stakeholders as well.
Thank you. Let me just go quickly to this because we're running out of time. You talked about rapid approach to assessment, generation of quality, for example, randomized controlled trials. Evidence is not known as rapid, especially as compared to the generation of digital solutions. What does the group see as the rate determining steps in the generation of quality evidence, and how can we address them?
I'm going to step in here. Isaac, fantastic. Thank you for moderating. I'm going to actually turn it around and ask you to answer our final question.
Sure.
The one we received from Vernon, the one you just asked for our panelists just now. What do you see as the rate limiting step in the generation of quality evidence?
So quality evidence is a full, embodies a full deal of work, that's why I initiated the conversation with all of you in regards to, and with Beth, in regards to the regulatory framework. So we have to include the quality by design, that includes the scientific and technical rigor that is connected to the design of a specific digital health technology tool. It includes the regulatory landscape that will frame how that can be or not utilized, and includes the logistical fit for purpose intended use of that specific device. Those parameters really determine the viability of that specific digital health technology tool and the success. And so it will be these three parameters, and keep in mind that everything that we do from the verification and validation standpoint is connected to the final intended use. So everything is done on the verification, validation, usability standpoint on a relative basis. All of that is connected to the generation of evidence for a specific intended use, and these are the things that we have discussed here today. We ran out of time. We thank you all for the panelists, Jordan, Jasmine, and Beth, for your wonderful insight. If there are questions that we didn't answer because we ran out of time, we are available to discuss these questions. Reach out to us in DIME Research Committee. Go to our website, where contact information is available there. And next but not least, I will say that there is another wonderful DIME webinar that is posted here, and I will pass it on to Rachel to close. Thank you all.
Perfect. Thank you, Isaac, for wrapping us up so nicely. And major thank you to also our presenters, Jordan, Jasmine, and Beth today. Fantastic work. Thank you for presenting this great stuff. I'll wrap it up really quickly. We do have two final events occurring for November for DIME. So first is our webinar coming up November 10th. Really exciting about this one is talking about open source actionable resources that can be used when we're thinking about building clinical trials of the future using technology, of course, using our favorite buzzword, DCTs. Additionally is a very exciting journal club that comes from a publication from our playbook. You can see here about how academic research is critical to building trust. So be sure to sign up for our November 17th webinar. And that's it. Thank you everyone again to attending today live, and to our fantastic panelists. Thank you.
Thank you.